Hey everyone, welcome to the Art Tutor, where I am always getting crafty. And before we move on, I'd like to thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it. And if you're enjoying the videos you see, please give me that thumbs up and then hit that subscribe button, as it really helps my channel a lot. So let's get started as I show you how to make this a super cute little felted needle book. The materials we are going to use to make our really cute little needle book here is a variety of colors of felt. I use two, essentially, one for the cover and then I like a white for the inside of our book, as shown, but you can go with any variety that you like. We have a variety of floss. There's no hard and fast rules where that is concerned either. Just run with it and have fun. We have a choice of buttons here, and these are pretty small, most of them, and that just tends to work better with the embroidering part, and then your button's not hiding a bunch of your design. We have our scissors and a ruler. I went ahead and I pre-cut the pieces so that I could show you the measurements. This is our cover of our book, so that would be the blue part here. So once it's put together, it's going to look like this. And that is measured at 5 inches or 13 centimeters. And that's just for this size of book. You can go as large or as small as you like. This is just a nice size to work with. So that's the cover for our book, and then here I have two pieces of white, and those are cut to that same dimension. So 5 inches or 13 centimeters, and then they are, let me just get that out of there, and then they are about 8 centimeters across here, and we're looking at 3 inches that way. Now one of these is going to be the inside of the cover of our book, and then the second one is going to be the actual pages of our book. So as you see here, so this is the inside cover, which we see here, and then this is going to be the pages, and this is where our needles fit in. So for this one, for the pages, I also have a couple of strips of the same white flannel. Once again, it's up to you. It's up to you what you decide to use. You could use other colors as well. So these are just a little bit over 6 inches, and I've cut them longer than our page deliberately. It's just a little bit easier to work with, a little bit less cumbersome. So when we put them together, we have a strip on one side, and then we take and we put the second strip on the back, right? So you have a strip on the front, you have a strip on the back, and then we sew through the center here to hold those pages together. So I went ahead and I put one together here for us. So then this is what our page looks like before we sew it together. Right, so strip on both sides, and that is what it ends up looking like. So this is our cover, the inside of our cover in our book, and then our needle pages. Okay, so I hope that's clear enough for you guys. And I decided to omit the actual sewing part of it. I don't really have the space here in my studio for a sewing machine. I'm just not set up that way, so I thought I would just show you how that all comes together. All right, and that would be the inside of our needle book right there. All right, now I suggest that when you do put your needle pages in, as well as the cover of your book, that you make the needle pages just a little bit smaller. You can trim them just a titch, and then just like any book, you don't tend to see the pages. They don't protrude, or they're not the same, and I'm talking hardcover books here, they're not the same width as what the cover is. And it just looks nice. I just like the way that it looks. All right, so we have that on the go. We're going to introduce our floss, and we're going to start to do a little bit of embroidery on here. Now, we do the embroidery before we attach the cover page to the cover, and that way it hides all of our stitching. So if you look at this one here, you're not seeing any of our stitching because that page covers everything. And it just keeps it clean, keeps it nice and neat. Now, before we start our needlebook project, I would just like to say that this tutorial is more about putting the book together than what it is about the embroidery per se. So for that part of it, I would suggest getting yourself a really good embroidery book. This one I just got on Amazon, and it goes into everything from just your basic embroidery through to tapestry type work. So highly recommend that. Or you can just go online and just see what you can find as far as embroidery patterns go. Anything is helpful if you're new to this type of medium. So we have our button, which I chose, and this one is quite a small button, which works really well. It doesn't obstruct lots of the pattern, and it's also easy to make our little loop. So this is our closure, is what that is. Now we have 4 colors of embroidery floss here, and I take a 6-strand embroidery floss and I split it in half. So each one of these is actually 3 strands of floss. You can go smaller or you can go larger. If you're using 5 or 6 strands, the floss does end up being quite thick, and you end up with a bulky pattern, which is desirable for some components of it, I suppose. I just find 3 strands are very manageable. All right, let's get started. So the first thing I want to do is I want to attach our button, and we do attach it at this point as well, because with the pages being separate, we're not going to see those stitches. I'm going to use our complementary, I'll just get those floss out of the way. We're going to use our complementary color. Starting from the back with all of our stitches. I'm just going to, keeping our floss straight so that it doesn't tangle. And sometimes it helps to just slide your finger between the loops, and that keeps the floss from rubbing together and becoming tangled. So we're going to do a couple of passes through this. Once again, pulling our floss so it doesn't get tangled. You see how I looped my finger, or stuck my finger in between the loops that we're making there. I'm pulling it tight, going back in. keeping those loops separated as much as possible. Now ultimately, or inevitably, there will be some tangling that goes on. It's generally pretty easy to get your floss untangled, but there is a bit of a trick to it. So I'm going to go in and I'm just going to run the needle through those stitches that we already made in the back. And we're going to pull that nice and tight. Okay, at this point I do come up underneath the button, but not through the hole of the button, and this isn't necessary. I just think this creates a bit of space so that when we do our loop, the closure part, this here, easily pops over top of our button. So I just take it and I just wrap it half a dozen times or so around the button, so not through the holes. We're talking around the stitches that we already made. And then back down. There we go. And now that's firmly attached. You can see that's not going anywhere. And once our book is all put together, you're not going to see those stitches at all. Alright, so I think we will start, since we already have our green floss on our needle, I think we're going to start to just create a stem with a few leaves, and then add our flowers at the end of the project, or as we're nearing the end of the embroidery part. So now I just need to decide where we're going to make that stem, or make those leaves. So you can draw on this, or you can just visualize it. I tend to just go with the visualization and see what comes of it. So just be patient with yourself, take your time. This project is meant to be enjoyed. As you can see, I've used the variegated floss, which I quite like, as it really gives you a really great variety of color with very little floss. And this floss I think I got at Dollar Tree, I believe, and it was a package of many colors. And I quite liked it because it really is a versatile, very versatile when it is multicolored. So one thing that I should point out before we get too much further into the project is that you want to leave some space around the perimeter of your covers, because that's where we're going to add our blanket stitch, and we still need it to capture our cover page here. So you want to make sure that you have ample space around here. That's not going to intrude upon your embroidery. So as you can see, I went in with our variegated green and I just created some stems here. And I think I'm going to do something along the lines of perhaps a straw flower type of flower, but I'll show you how to make the leaves, which is just a very, very simple stitch. So I'll come in here, I'll just find where the two stitches come together, and then I'm going to take my floss and I'm going to create a loop. So I hope you can see that. And once I've decided how big I would like that loop to be, then I quite simply go back down in my originating spot, the originating point here. And then I'm going to come back up underneath. And you can see that floss is still free moving, so we haven't tacked it down yet. But we've come up, and this is going to tighten and give us that loop. Right? So just like that, super cute. And then we just go down right back where our floss came out. And there's our cute little leaf. Like I said, you find an embroidery book and it goes through this very, very clearly. So I'm going to go ahead and I am going to add a bunch of leaves to this. So as you can see, I have gone in and I have done all of our little leaves on our book cover. And the next thing I want to do is I'm going to add some really pretty little pink bachelor buttons or straw flowers. And these, incidentally, are my mom's favorite wildflower, if you will. So these are pretty straightforward. Once again, it's just going to be a bunch of radiating lines. Now I'm going to bring the flower down low, which will probably mean overlapping some of this green that we had in for the stem, and that's fine, just because it didn't leave quite enough room for up here without doing that. And that's cool. That's the variable of this. So I simply am going down and then I'm coming back up at what I want to be the center-ish of our flower, and I'm just making straight stitches. So same stitch that we used to go up here and make our stem. And we want long lines, we want shorter lines, but we're going to try and get it, keep the stitches so that they go in that circular pattern to indicate a flower. And once we've actually done this, we can go in and we can fill it in a little bit more. This part of it is just going to give the basic shape of that flower. Okay, so I went in and I finished our larger bachelor buttons, and now I want to add a couple of French knots just to kind of indicate little flower buds. So by doing that, all we do is bring our needle up. And I don't know that you guys can see this very well, but it gives you a design ideas. And then we hold our thread. I'm right-handed, so I'm holding it in my left hand. And then we quite simple, simply take our needle and we pop it in underneath. So this is our thread. We pop it in underneath and then we just wrap the thread around 3 or 4 times, and then we go back in to our originating hole, and then you are holding very firmly to that floss and you slowly pull it through and it creates this cute little knot. Once again, coming up in that wherever we want the knot to be. I'm holding it in my left hand, taking my needle, putting it underneath the floss, wrapping it 3 times, and then hooking it back through our felt, holding onto it tightly, tautly, firmly, and we pull it through. And they're not all going to be perfect, and they're not all going to be the same, and that is the beauty of embroidery. So I have a couple there, and I'm going to move over to the next flower. And you do need a length of floss for this. It gets really difficult the shorter your floss is. Alright, so we've gotten our little French knots scattered through our little pattern here, and then we just flip it over and we just run the needle through the back of the stitches. And this is a good time to show you guys why it is that we want that cover, why we do our embroidery first, because it really ends up being a big mess back here. Oops, snipping that off. I want to keep track of this needle. Put that over there. And now we're going to start to do our blanket stitch around our book. Now it can be a little tricky. Excuse me, I'm just getting some floss. It'd be a little tricky to start this. It can look kind of messy. So try and start at the bottom, where you're not going to notice it as much if you have trouble with this, and I tend to. So I have a few people in my life that are really fantastic at starting this, but that would not be me. So I've pushed all the pages to the side here, and I want to start off at the back so our knot is there. And once again, I really love this floss because it's variegated. And then I come back and put it through one more time, but let's try and keep our floss where it originated with our first pass through the fabric. Holding on to this, and this will help you kind of gauge your stitch length as well. And I have a little bit of the white thread from when we stitched all of our pieces together, so I'm just going to get that out of there. Okay, so the blanket stitch, essentially what it is we start off with a straight stitch. Hope you guys can see this. And then you come through underneath it at the top. And then closing this up. And you want to always see your stitches come out the top. And we might have to go in and trim our felt a little bit while we're doing this. All right, push those pages out of the way. Okay, so I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to bring it from back to front, and I've got that little loop, and I'm going to go through that loop and I'm going to pull it tight, and that's what I end up with. So once again, going in, coming up from the back, so that our loop, and we're taking our needle and we're putting it through that loop. And pulling it tight. So you see how it's giving us our little line design here. All right, so we've gotten to the center of our book, and this is where we want to add our loop to go over our button. So we quite simply make a loop, make sure your thread, make sure your floss is straight and sits flat. And then we're just going to go underneath that blanket stitch. You want to make sure this is long enough to go over our button, and that's going to be a fantastic length right there. So we're just going to tack that in place on both sides. We want it to sit firmly. Keeping track of which loop is which loop. All right, that looks great. And now we just test it on our button. Awesome. And that's going to completely disappear because we're doing our blanket stitch all the way around. Oh, and as you can see, the sun has come out. So as you can see, we have come all the way around to our originating point, and to finish it off, you quite simply make that last stitch, which finishes off the top, and then come back through, and I mean just a minute stitch here, and then thread it through a few of those stitches, pulling it taut so that it holds, not too tight because you don't want to warp your stitches, and then just snip it nice and close. And there we go. There is our beautiful little hand-stitched needle book. And to keep track of your needles, you quite simply just pop them through this row of felt that we added, and you can keep track of them that way. And it's really nice because you can add as many pages as you like. It will bulk it up considerably if you add more, but I do have one where I have my regular hand stitching needles, I have my cross stitch needles, I have my embroidery needles, etc., etc. So it's really quite, they're really quite nice that way. And then you're not fishing through your sewing box or your floss box to find your needles. So we just close it up. And by the way, you can, instead of using the floss, this is looking a little cumbersome, you could do a little flap on it with just a little snap So that would make it a little bit easier if you have trouble with the fine motor skills. So here's a variety of my books, and I absolutely love them. They turn out different every single time. Thank you so much for popping by and joining me today as I show you how I make these little needle books. And I'd like to thank you for subscribing, giving me the thumbs up. That really helps my channel a lot. And I welcome you to pop by and see what I get up to next week. Thanks so much, guys. Have a fantastic day.